Good day everyone, this is the Group 5 and we will be reporting about the Restoration period. So first, let us know what is Restoration period. The Restoration period of the English monarchy began in 1660 when the English, Scottish, and Irish monarchies were all restored during the reign of King Charles II, the son of the executed Charles I. It is also called as Restoration after the 11-year Commonwealth period during which the country was governed by Parliament under the supervision of General Oliver Cromwell. So after the death or the execution of King Charles I, England became a republican country under General Oliver Cromwell. When he died, they voted King Charles II to restore his throne and also to re-establish the English monarchy and re-establish and restore the freedom of England. Also, these political events became one of the reasons of changes or positive changes in the literary, scientific, and cultural life of Britain. The regaining of power or the restoration of power by King Charles II became a way for Britain to improve their literature, to be open on scientific matters, and also to develop their cultural life. In addition, this period was also known as the Age of Reason and Enlightenment. From the word reason, in this era, people began recognizing and accepting scientific reasoning in understanding the world, and also they are enlightened on the uses of human reason as a guide, and they stopped asking why things happen and focus instead of the how. For example, in this period, people no longer believe in signs and vast punishments from God, but begin to turn to science and order. Their way of thinking changed from being purely religious or solely superstitious to realism and focusing more on the facts of the real world. Lastly, the period of Restoration was also called as the Neoclassical in terms of literature, as writers of this time put emphasis on the original writings produced by classical Greek and Roman literature. Some of their works are based on neoclassical literature, and their way of writing or the literary tools are shifted from religious to satirical or risque. Satire as the literary tool was the most used in this era, as they helped in educating people. Writers were better able to educate the public through literature. Its function was to acknowledge a problem in society and attempt to reform the problem in a comical manner while still educating the public. Although the vibe of the literary piece written in satirical way is comical, it still educates people about the relevance of or the effects of social injustices or political context, political injustices in the period of Britain on that time.
Hello everyone, have a good day. So my topic is all about political context and is still a part of restoration period. So the restoration period of Charles II has a particularly defining influence on the literature that was written in the second half of the 17th century. Political events of the previous decades resulted in tremendous turmoil for the English people. So the Restoration period was written in the second half of the 17th century, and the political events resulted in turmoil, or it is a great disturbance for the English people. The division between those who supported a more traditional form of government and those who wanted a more republican form of government led to strong tension throughout England. So there is a tension or position of the two groups, which is the more traditional form of government and more republican form of government. So, sila yung naglalaban throughout England. And this tension led to the English Civil War, which lasted from 1642 to 1651 and was a particularly brutal experience for many British people. So, it led to a violent experience for many British people. Next, in 1660, Charles II became king, restoring the English monarchy. After Charles II died in 1685, his brother James II took over the throne. Afraid of the policies James II might introduce, William III removed James II in 1688 and took over the English throne in 1689. So, matapos namatay si Charles II in 1685, yung kapatid niya na si James II, siya yung nag-took over the throne. Pero, dahil sa takot niya sa policies, yung pangalan niya pinalitan niya niyang William III, and then tinuk over niya yung English throne in 1689. This act is often referred to as Glorious Revolution because the transfer of power was not very bloody. Glorious Revolution, also called the Revolution of 1688 and the Bloodless Revolution. Next. Punta tayo sa philosophical context. The start of the Restoration period roughly coincides with the beginning of what is known as the Enlightenment, which lasted until the end of the 18th century. So, yung simula ng Restoration period ay tinatawag na Enlightenment. The Enlightenment was defined by an emphasis on reason and logic, the thinkers of the period. So, yung Enlightenment dito ay it is a reason and logic and the thinkers of the period. It helped develop the natural world as a knowable and testable subject. Next. Many Restoration writers viewed the changes to their government and the violence that these changes brought with them as the direct result of those who dogmatically held to their ideology. So, dahil sa nangyari na revolution, yung mga writers na nakasaksi doon, meron silang magkakaibang ideology na nabuo. So, the word dogmatically here refers to the, it is the way where you can think that you are right and that everyone else is wrong. In this sense, the political events that occurred in England provide insight into the skepticism that is at the heart of Restoration literature. The word skepticism is doubt. So, yun lang po. Thank you.
Theater is one of the most significant aspects of Restoration literature is the return of theater. It also spelled theater, which means in agriculture, a building or space in which a performance may be given before an audience, and usually has a stage area where the performance itself takes place. The word theater is from the Greek theatron, a place of seeing. In theater, there is a Restoration comedy. Was frequently crass, largely sexual, and often focused on the interactions of the elite members of English society. So, Restoration comedy is English comedy written and performed in the Restoration period of 1660 to 1710. And although Restoration literature is commonly considered to end around 1688, Restoration comedy was written into the 70s and also known comedy of manners issues as a synonyms for this. Let's move on to the popular writer of Restoration comedy include John Dryden. John Dryden is an English diplomat and creator of the Restoration era comedy of manners. Also, beside from being the greatest English poet, of the later 17th century, Dryden wrote almost 30 tragedies, comedies, and dramatic operas. Next is George Etheridge. Is perhaps the most famous Restoration playwright, best known for his Man of Mode. Si George Etheridge ay hindi lang bilang isang kilala sa Man of Mode, kundi isa rin siya sa first important figure in Restoration comedy. He introduced to English theater the comedy of manners, a witty dramatic type that satirizes the manners and fashions of a particular social class. And the last list of popular writer of Restoration comedy was William Congreve, an English playwright and poet of the Restoration period. So, si William Congreve is also known for his clever satirical dialogue and influence on the comedy of manners style of that period. And he was also a minor political figure in the British Whig Party. Let's move on to poetry. What is poetry? Poetry, a literature that evokes a concentrated imaginative awareness of experiences or a specific emotional response through language chosen and arranged for its meaning, sound, and rhythm. Also, a poetry was strongly influenced by the political context of the mid-17th century. Here are the Restoration poetry, focus more on the glory and powerful potential of human beings to understand and improve the world. So Restoration poetry is focused in glory and powerful potential of human being. That is the highlighted words. And many poets cited the importance of learning from Greek and Roman poets, and some became famous for their translation of ancient poetry. Let's move on to the poets who produced poetry that attempted to guide people back to traditional religion as well as stinging satire. First is Jonathan Swift, 1667 to 1745. He is best known as the author of A Modest Proposal, 1729, and Gulliver's Travel, 1726. Jonathan Swift is also a widely acknowledged as the greatest prose satirist in the history of English literature, and A Tale of Ahab, 1704. Here are the work of Jonathan Swift. Modest Proposal. It means is a better pamphlet that ironically suggests that the Irish babies be specifically fattened for profitable sale as meat, since the English were eating the Irish people anyhow by heavy taxation. To make it clear, a modest proposal is for preventing the children of poor people from being a burden to their parents or the country, and for making them beneficial to the public. And the next work of Jonathan Swift is the Gulliver's Travel. Gulliver's Travel is a satire on human folly and stupidity. Swift said that he wrote it to vex the world rather than to divert it. So, the main idea of this work of Swift, Gulliver's Travel, is the inherent amusement of human tradition and habit, as well as the relative nature of ethics and society dependent on historical precedent. Next poets is Alexander Pope, 1688 to 1744. He published an exposition of the rules of the classical school in the form of poem, an essay on criticism. And he was also known one of the foremost British authors in satires of the 18th century. Now let's talk about his most famous work, The Rape of the Lock. The Rape of the Lock is based on real events that Pope had related to him by a friend. The Rape of Lock is mockingly describes a furious fight between two families when a young man snips off a lock of the beautiful Belinda's hair. The third poet was Thomas Gray, 1716 to 1771. He wrote Elegy written in a country churchyard, which is a collection of 18th century commonplaces expressing concern for lowly folk. Thomas Gray is also a poet that expresses deep and universal human feelings in a form derived from Greek and Roman literature. And let's move on to Henry Fielding, year 1707 to 1754. Henry is known for his Tom Jones, which tells the story of a young foundling who is driven from his adopted home, wanders to the London, and eventually, for all his suffering, wins his lady. Si Henry Fielding isa rin siyang English novelist, irony writer, and a dramatist known for earthy humor and satire. And the fifth poet was Lawrence Sterne, 1713 to 1768. He was an Anglo-Irish novelist and Anglican cleric who wrote Tristram Shandy, a novel in 9 volumes showcasing a series of loosely organized funny episodes in the life of Shandy. In the sixth and last poets who produced poetry that attempted to guide people back to the traditional religion as well as stinging satire was Oliver Goldsmith, year 1728 to 1774. She stops to conquer in a comedy of manners that satirizes the 18th century aristocracy who is overly class conscious. The word highlighted in this is the comedy of manner.